The Young Detectives and the Bank Robbers by Ngamoko Nikora. Chapter 1. A Mysterious Visit. The attic of Teepo's house was filled with excitement as Tom, Mark, Teepo, and Bee gathered around the low table cluttered with maps, notes, and their time-travel device, a modification of an old pocket watch gifted by Sherlock Holmes. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dusty room that had become their headquarters. "Do you think we'll ever have another adventure like the one with the clockmaker?" Mark asked, tapping a pencil against the table. "I'm not sure, but I've got a feeling something big is coming," Tipo replied, glancing toward the device. "Holmes usually contacts us when time is of the essence." Just as he finished speaking, the time device began to glow, simmering with energy. The room shimmered, and the familiar voice of Sherlock Holmes echoed through the air. "Tom, Mark, Teapot B, I have need of your unique skills." Holmes's voice resonated, pulling their attention. "Time is of the essence." "What's going on?" Tom asked, the thrill of excitement swirling within him. "A gang known as Blackjack Bandits is planning to rob the Bank of England, and I require your help to thwart their scheme," said Holmes. The detectives exchanged determined glances, adrenaline surging through their veins. "Looks like we're back in business," Bee exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Are you ready?" Holmes asked. "Absolutely," they responded in unison. Chapter 2. Time Travel. "Prepare yourselves," Holmes declared, guiding the group to the time device. "Stepping into the past can be disorienting, but stay alert." With careful hands, they adjusted the dials, and the attic faded away, replaced by swirling colours and sounds. Moments later, they found themselves standing in the bustling streets of Victorian London. "Wow, it really feels like we've stepped into a different world," Mark exclaimed, his eyes wide as he took in the horse-drawn carriages and the architecture of the towering buildings. "Keep focused," Tom reminded. "We need to find Holmes and learn about this gang." As they moved through the streets, they made their way toward the magnificent structure of the Bank of England, with its grand facade towering over them, the scent of fresh bread wafted by from a nearby bakery, and the chatter of townsfolk filled their ears. A bearded gentleman in a bowler hat brushed past them, glancing back curiously. "Keep your wits about you. The streets can be dangerous," he muttered. "Let's find Holmes. He's probably at Baker Street," Tipo suggested, leading the way. Chapter 3. The Gang's Plans. Arriving at Baker Street, they entered the familiar 221B and found Sherlock Holmes deep in conversation with Inspector Lestrade. "Ah, my young friends," Holmes said, a gleam of satisfaction lighting his eyes. "Just in time. We have much to discuss." The young detectives gathered around as Holmes leaned over a map stretched across the table. "This gang has been evading law enforcement for too long. They are clever, but with your help we can outsmart them." Lestrade added, "The gang is notorious for their vicious methods. They are led by a man called Blackjack Blake, known for his cunning plans and ruthlessness." "Are there any leads?" Tom asked, his brow furrowing in concentration. "I believe they will strike tomorrow during business hours, making their move when the bank is most vulnerable," Holmes stated. "We need to gather intelligence and learn their method of operation." "Undercover!" Mark exclaimed. What if we take on different roles within the bank? Holmes nodded approvingly. Indeed, that will be our advantage. You must gather information without drawing suspicion. Chapter 4. Infiltrating the gang. The group devised a plan to divide their efforts, assigning roles that would allow them to infiltrate various parts of the gang's operations. We should gather information from those close to the bank, Tipo said. Perhaps we can learn about any gang members posing as patrons. I'll work inside the bank as a clerk, B volunteered. I can observe any unusual activities during the day. I'll pose as a street vendor outside the bank, Mark suggested, excitement in his voice. That way, I can keep an eye on any gang members entering or leaving. And I'll blend in as a passerby, Tom said, his determination palpable. I'll gather info on the gang's movements. With their roles decided, they prepared for their first day of undercover work. Chapter 5. A narrow escape. The next morning, the streets of London were alive with activities as the young detectives took their positions. B, wearing a simple dress, played the role of an eager bank clerk, while Tom, Mark, and Tipo discreetly observed from various angles. As the day progressed, the bank filled with patrons, but B noticed a group of men whispering quietly in the corner. Among them was the unmistakable presence of Blackjack Blake. They're planning something, B whispered collectively to Tom, Mark, and Tipo during their lunch break. I overheard them discussing the vault. Let's go back to the scene and gather more intel, Tom suggested, sensing urgency. They repositioned themselves, strategizing on how to approach the gang without revealing their true identities. Suddenly, a ruckus erupted as Blake and his crew prepared to leave. The young detective stayed hidden, but the gang's leader spotted them just as they turned to slip away. Hey! Who are those kids? Blake shouted. Run! Mark shouted as they dashed for cover, hearts pounding in their chests. The gang chased them through the crowded streets, but the young detectives used their agility to weave through the bustling crowd. Chapter 6. The heist begins. They regrouped in a secluded alley, panting and out of breath. That was too close, Tipo said, wide-eyed. We can't let them know we're onto them. We need to warn Holmes, Tom insisted. If they're planning to strike the blank, it's only a matter of time before they execute their plan. Let's set up a meeting with Holmes tonight, B proposed. We can share what we know and strategize for tomorrow. Agreeing on a time, they returned to Baker Street that evening, where they shared their intel. Blake is determined, Holmes said, his face serious. His crew isn't just skilled, they're dangerous. We must stay one step ahead, but we'll need to move quickly. Can we set a trap? Mark suggested, hopeful. Precisely. A carefully laid trap to catch them in the act, Holmes agreed, outlining a plan for the following day. Chapter 7. The Chase. The day of the robbery arrived, and tension filled the air. The young detectives took their positions outside the Bank of England, along with Holmes and Lestrade, ready to execute their trap. As the clock struck 12, a noise drew their attention. A carriage pulled up outside, and Blake's gang members began to emerge. Now! Holmes barked, and they sprang into action. B, acting as the bank clerk, quickly alerted the bank guards as the young detectives moved to cut off any escape routes. Tom led the group to surround the gang, stealthily moving into place. Suddenly, Blake noticed the commotion and charged toward an alley with his crew, but they were not quick enough. "Don't let them escape!" Lestrade shouted, leading the chase. The young detectives sprinted after them, determined to prevent the robbery at all costs. The streets of London became a blur around them as they chased the gang through winding alleyways and narrow streets. Chapter 8. Confrontation. Just as they thought they might lose their targets, the gang cornered themselves near the Thames, unable to move further. Tom, Mark, Tipo and B closed the gap, forming a barrier behind the alley. "No way out, Blackjack," Tom shouted, confronting the gang. Blackjack sneered, unfazed by the group of young detectives. "You think you can stop us? You're nothing but kids." Mark stepped forward, kids with skills and courage. A fierce exchange ensued between the young detectives and the gang. Using their cunning, quick thinking and teamwork, they initiated a plan to confront Blackjack and his crew. Just as Tom prepared to advance, Blake pulled out a pocket knife, establishing himself as a threat. But before he could strike, Tipo moved in front of his sister, shielding B from danger. "Enough!" Tipo yelled, his voice filled with strength. "You're surrounded. It's over." Realizing the tables had turned, Blackjack growled, "You may have outsmarted me this time, but I'll be back." Before he could spring away, Lestrade and the authorities arrived, quickly apprehending the gang members. Holmes smiled approvingly at the young detectives. "Well done, my friends," he commended, the pride evident in his voice. "You've proven your worth yet again." Chapter 9. Resolution. As the authorities led the gang toward custody, the young detectives caught their breath, exhilarated by their success. "We really did it," B exclaimed, jumping up and down in excitement. "Thanks to teamwork and quick thinking," Tom replied, grinning at his friends. "Not to mention a little help from our mentor," Mark added, looking toward Holmes. Holmes chuckled, his eyes shining with encouragement. "You have become quite adept at solving mysteries. Each case brings you closer together and closer to becoming true detectives." Later that evening, as they gathered back at Baker Street, the tense moments of the day played through their minds. "What's next for us?" Tipo wondered aloud. "Well, given the nature of our adventures, I have a feeling that there are many more mysteries to solve," Holmes replied, tapping the side of his nose. "The world is full of intrigue, just waiting for your keen minds." Chapter 10. Returning home and a new adventure. After they shared a celebratory meal, the young detectives prepared to return home, using the time device they gathered for their journey. "Remember, you've proven to everyone, especially yourselves, what you're capable of," Holmes encouraged before they activated the device. "Until next time, my young detectives." As they stepped into the swirling vortex of time, they found themselves back in their attic, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of their headquarters. "That was incredible," B exclaimed, bouncing with joy. "I can't wait for our next adventure." Tom, Mark and Tipo nodded, sharing smiles of understanding. They had faced danger, solved a mystery, and learned the value of their partnership, stronger than ever. With their heads filled with dreams of future cases and mysteries, the young detectives prepared for their next adventure, together, always ready to face the unknown. The Young Detectives and the Bank Robbers by Ngamoko Nikora. Copyright Ngamoko Nikora.